Hello, everyone. I wanted to just quickly come on and share with you a new plan that I put together, or new approach that I put together about how you can use game jams as a way to practice your game development skills and to even start building a portfolio of games for yourself. So, if you are watching this, um, at the time of the recording, it's about to be a new year. I think this is a great time to start off the new year with doing this plan, but you can pick it up and get started with it at any time of the year. So let's go ahead and get into it. I call this the Game Jam Learning Plan. So, uh, this is a systematic, intentional approach to using game jams to really develop your game development skills. And maybe you can even make some games that you can show off in a portfolio, and maybe you can even monetize them. So the basic approach is to have alternating periods of focused studying where you're learning skills that you can apply to your game development, and then game jams where you're actually applying those skills. And the great thing about this plan is that you can use it even if you're a beginner to game development or the particular tools that you want to use, or if you're more advanced but you want a way to really uh, put your skills into practice with a more structured approach to learning. So first of all, if you're not familiar with what a game jam is, it is a time-bound event in which participants are given a theme and a time frame in which they're supposed to develop a game from scratch based on that theme. So, for instance, you might have been or heard of jams where you have a weekend or, a week or two to develop a game. And at the end of that period, you share the game with other people, and the game has to be related to a jam, to a theme that's usually announced at the beginning of the jam. And I do want to clarify that there's different ways that you can apply or incorporate a theme into your game. So, it can be through the mechanics of the game, like the gameplay itself. So, for instance, if the theme for the jam is money, then maybe the game mechanics really focus on um, some way to generate or use money, right? Or maybe the story itself heavily involves money. So maybe you're, a merchant who's trying to make a lot of money, or your character is mining for metals to create coins, or maybe the character you play is a struggling student taking on odd jobs to cover tuition expenses and school fees, or something like that. So there's a lot of different ways that you can incorporate your theme into your game. Okay, so now let's get into the actual plan and the approach. So, as I mentioned before, the learning plan is divided into two main components: the study or learning period and the game jam period. So, the study period, let's talk about that first. That's the time frame that you set aside um, to focus on completing tutorials in your chosen game development tool and learning useful skills. All right. So when you're starting the your initial study period, uh, you might be doing this and you've never used a particular tool before, so you need time to learn some basic skills in that particular tool. All right. So the first thing you need to do is actually choose a tool if you have not already. So you can choose a game engine or a programming language or whatever it is that you want to use to make games. All right. So if you're an absolute beginner with no coding experience at all, I would suggest maybe looking at a beginner friendly tool like maybe GDevelop or MIT Scratch. Those are really good tools that will teach you the basic concepts of game development without having to focus too much on knowing a particular programming language. All right. If you do have some coding experience, depending on the language that you might want to look at something like Phaser JS, which is for like JavaScript and web development or HTML. P5GS, another JavaScript game development framework, or maybe even something like Unity with C Sharp. Or I think Godot also uses C Sharp. So you have some options. So you want to figure out what tool you might be most comfortable with. Now, I would recommend that when you're looking for your tools, um, that the tool you choose has plenty of up-to-date tutorials and learning resources, that it has an active community or forum if you need help, and also try to make sure that it has an option to easily release the game in HTML and deploy it on a web browser. All right. Because usually for game jams, especially, if you're going to be sharing this with other people, or if you're going to be creating a portfolio of games to show other people, a lot of times potential players don't want to download and install something, especially if they're looking at games in a jam where there's like a lot of different games to play, right? They would prefer to at least play the game initially in a web browser, and then maybe if they like it, they might download like a full version or something like that. But you'll lose a lot of potential players if you don't have a web browser version of your game. Okay? So now that you've chosen your tool, the next thing you want to do is for this first study or learning period, you want to identify and complete the official tutorials for that tool that teach you the basic elements. All right. And at a minimum, the skills that I suggest that you learn during this initial learning period are how to draw sprites and images to the screen, how to draw text to the screen, how to get and respond to player input. So that might be via the keyboard, your mouse, gamepad, touchscreen, or whatever, depending on what devices you want to release your games for. So, like if you want to do mobile, um, with the phone, you want to do touch screen. But if you want to do computer or a laptop or something like that, you'll be looking at a mouse and a keyboard. You also want to look at learning how to use conditional statements. So that basically is if one condition is true, then the player or the game will take a certain action. Else, if a different condition is true, then you take a different action. All right. And once you get into your tool and start learning the tutorials, you'll see a lot more about what conditional statements are. Right. Um, you also want to be able to store, check, and use data in variables, right? Because when you're playing games or making games, there's a lot of different information that needs to be saved and used throughout the game. So variables are really going to help you with that. And I would also suggest, lastly, learn how to do basic arithmetic and math and number comparisons. So things definitely like addition, subtraction, checking if two values are equal, checking if one number is greater than or less than another, and so on. All right. And you can even do comparisons between other types of data too, like checking to see if two names or two words are equal or something like that. Okay. So those are the basic skills that I recommend that you have, that you learn during the initial study period. All right. So these skills, if you learn them, will allow you to at least make a very simple game with minimal features. And depending on your creative skills, um, you can really create even more complex games with this skill set. All right. Um, if your chosen tool has good documentations and tutorials and whatnot, you probably should be able to learn all of this information just by following like the basic path or learning path that the tool provides for you. So the basic tutorials that you have for the most part. So you shouldn't have to go out of your way to find that stuff. If you have a tool with good support, you'll pretty much learn that along the way as part of the process. Okay. As far as how long this time period should be, this for the initial study period or learning period, I recommend setting aside at least 2 weeks or maybe even a month to learn this baseline skill set for the initial study period. Okay, so a month might seem like a long time, but as most of us are probably aware, You probably still have other responsibilities and duties in your life outside of game development. So that could be, if you are in school, if you have a family, if you have work, you still have to commit to those things too. So you might not be able to sit down and do all of this in 2 weeks straight. So, if you can, that's great. But, I would recommend setting yourself up for success with a longer period. All right. Um, so that is the overview of the study period, right? The next period, once you finish the study period, is the game jam period. All right. So once you've got a basic understanding of that baseline skill set, that's when you start the game jam period. And here's what we're going to do. So I suggest setting aside a 2 week period, starting no more than a few days after your first learning period ends, or after your learning period ends, rather. So you want to make sure that the skills you learned are still fresh in your mind. So that's why I say no more than a few days after your learning period ends. Okay. The next thing you can do is choose a theme for your game jam. Okay. And in the description for this video, I will include some links because there's several websites that will randomly provide themes that you can use for your jam. So there's like the Let's Make a Game generator, the Flash Museum generator, and another generator that I'll link that has an online uh, tool that randomly gives you back a game jam theme. Okay. And maybe you can also come up with your own theme ideas and put them in like a bag and pick one or something like that. Once you have your theme idea, you want to use the skills that you've learned and come up with a game idea that incorporates those skills and the game jam theme. Okay, and I'll talk more about game ideas in a second here. All right. Once you have your idea, you want to create the game. It can be a very rough, it doesn't have to be super polished. It doesn't need fancy art or sound or anything like that. Um, if you're able to and you're willing to share your game online or with people that you know, I think that's also a good idea because that way you can start getting some feedback on your games and figuring out what works and what doesn't, what people like, what they don't, and how to make your games better. Okay. And then at the end of the jam period, once you finish making your game, do a quick self evaluation of how your jam went. So, again, like I said, what worked well with the whole process? What did not work so well? What did you learn? How did people respond to your game if you gathered feedback? And some of this can also include not just the game itself, but like your process. Like did you set aside enough time? Did you wait till the last minute? Did you have like a good balance of being able to work on the game throughout the 2 weeks while balancing your other responsibilities? Okay. Now, as I said, I want to talk to you a little bit about game ideas because sometimes that can be really hard to come up with like an idea. I said come up with a game idea based on the skills and the jam theme, but a lot of times that's easier said than done, right? So, especially when you're starting out, your game ideas might borrow heavily from the tutorial projects that you complete during your learning period, or maybe even other existing games. And I found that sometimes it's easier to focus on actually using the skills that you've learned if you don't have to focus so much on coming up with a completely original game idea at the same time, right? Because, coming up with game ideas, that's a creative skill in itself, right? So sometimes you want to just focus on one thing at a time, right? Even still, though, it would be good practice for you if you can try to make some minor changes to the tutorial or the game that you're borrowing from so that it's not a complete copy of a tutorial or a different game. So like if you're using a tutorial project for inspiration, are there things that you can change? Um, Things that maybe you didn't like so much, maybe like an additional feature or two that you can add. something like that. Um, you always make sure that you give credit, and if you do make a clone of a game, don't like try to pass that off as your own original idea. Now, I understand that games, even professionally made games, they borrow and reuse themes and features all the time. So no game is completely unique. All right, for instance, Candy Crush. That's a really popular game, but it's basically a match three game, and there's been lots of match three games in the past, and some that even used candy as a theme even like back in the 90s. All right. So you're not always going to be able to come up with something completely unique. But what I mean, though, what I'm really thinking about is don't do things like make a complete carbon copy of a game and then do something like put it on the App Store for sale or something like that, right? Believe it or not, there are some people that they do the basic game tutorials or the tool tutorials and then just submit the game that they made from the tutorial to the marketplace, just maybe with some different art or something like that. So, that's really not cool. And then that also floods the marketplace with a bunch of ripoffs, right? So, what I will say about this is use your best judgment, okay? Like, generally when you're just copying off of somebody. Um, and because this is like a practice jam for your own personal improvement, this is kind of like a specialized process. Um, so I think in this case, it's more understandable if you make games that are more derivative of others just for the sake of practice, right? But I would not recommend taking this approach for other game jams, though, or for games that you're going to release for the market. In those situations, in a lot of cases, participants and players and the judges are going to be looking for more originality and creativity. All right. And again, as stated before, if you do a copy of another game for your own personal practice, it should be really just for practice. And it's probably best if you state that in your game description if you are open to feedback from a wide audience. Okay. Um, so that's a little bit about game ideas. And I can also talk more later about some other tips for how to come up with game ideas too. All right. So now you know the study and learning period and the game jam period parts of the process. So once you've completed your first jam, the next step is just to keep repeating the process, right? So in your second um, process, you can begin another study period and then do another jam period. All right. So in this case, usually the learning periods, you're going to only focus on one or two new skills to focus on for the learning periods rather than that bigger baseline skill set. Um, and how do you figure out which skills to work on next? So um, one way you might do it is you can continue doing the official tutorials or other resources for your tool. If you feel up to it, you might even look through the non-tutorial documentation to learn about some new skill ideas and things that you can try out. Or if there's a specific type of game or idea that you'd like to make eventually, you can choose skills that you would need for that type of game. So, for example, if you're someone who really loves RPGs, um, and they always say don't make an RPG as your first game, but there's nothing wrong with taking your this game jam process, learning process to build up to make an RPG. So maybe one learning period you'll focus on how to do something like adding dialogue to a game, because a lot of RPGs are dialogue heavy. Maybe next time after that, your next learning or study period is focused on including different dialogue branches and choices. So, building on the basic dialogue with a more complex version of the skill. And then maybe after that, you work on learning how to make an inventory system for your player, and then maybe a turn-based battle system, and so on. So build up um, gradually, right? And some of that also requires that you think about the type of games that you like or your ideas and figure out well, what do I need to know to make this game happen? Okay. As far as the time periods, so after your initial jam, like I mentioned before, you might want to shorten that learning period to just 2 weeks, since you're not going to be focusing on as many skills. Um, so with this approach, with a, maybe like a 2 week learning study period and a 2 week jam period, you should be doing about a game a month. Okay. Um, great, great. So that's the overall idea behind the game jam learning plan. And in the description, I'm going to be linking some additional resources. I've been working on a free game jam planning resource pack that you can download that gives you some guidance on how to participate in and get the most out of a game jam. So you can apply this to your personal learning jams that we talked about here, as well as any other game jams that you enter. Okay. Um, and I will also include the link to this document that we went over in the video. Keep checking back for updates to this document and the Game Jam Learning Resource Pack. Um, and yeah, so hopefully that gives you a good roadmap for a way that you can start to really improve and build your skills. Um, and one of the great things I like about this is that sometimes we get too caught up in doing tutorials, but not really applying things. So we know how to follow instructions, but we don't know how to apply the skills outside of like that instructions that we get in the tutorials. So this is something that I think if you really stick with it, it's going to help you to really ingrain and internalize the skills. So let me know if you have any questions or comments. I invite you to start off the new year with a commitment to improving your game development skills or any time you happen to view this video. Okay. Thanks. Happy New Year if it's that time of year that you're watching this. And otherwise, um, take care, and I hope to hear more about your game development success.